Hello and welcome to Clydebridge Station and another how to model video. The high-speed train in the 1970s was the iconic British train and came around a time of massive development in the railways in this country, which, if you suppose, really started with the creation of the Passenger Transport Executives in 1969. And the investment that took place in several of those areas, the renewed Glasgow Underground and the reopening of the low-level line through Glasgow Central in 1979, the opening of the Merseyrail Underground network in 1977, and the opening of the Tyne and Wear Metro in 1980, and the new Jubilee line in 1979. If there's an iconic Scottish train of the 1980s, well, you're looking at it. And it's this which is the subject of our new video. How to model the Scotrail Express. The roots of the Scotrail Express go back quite far indeed to 1971, when, as part of the Scottish region's desire to improve the service between Edinburgh and Glasgow, the Rolls-Royce fitted intercity DMUs, which could only do 75 miles per hour and which took about 70 minutes end to end, were replaced by a new style of rolling stock using two Class 27s, one at either end of a rake of 6 Mark IIs. Reliability was a serious problem, in particular the Doubts generators, and the Class 27s had never been subjected to such an intensive use before, and they weren't really designed for the job. But it gave the Scottish region time to develop a more robust system, which is what was before your eyes now. And that was using a Class 47 at one end, a rake of coaches, and a driving brake standard open at the remote end. We'll move the coaching stock in a few minutes to let you see the DBSO. The first of these trains came on stream in 1979, and by the summer of 1980 the Class 27 formations had ceased, all being provided by the push-pull sets. With the creation of the business sectors in 1982, this provincial sector took on the running of the push-pull sets, although the brand name Scotrail was not used until 1984, and the locomotives started to appear in this livery here along with the coaching stock. Conversion of another 4 Class 47s to 47/7 in 1985 allowed the Edinburgh to Aberdeen services to go over to push-pull operation, forming a sort of triangle: Edinburgh-Glasgow, Glasgow-Aberdeen, Edinburgh-Aberdeen, although in reality there were never enough of these machines to actually go around. They became available in the first place after the introduction of high-speed trains onto the Western region in 1977, and it was the creation of those that allowed surplus rolling stock to be withdrawn and other surplus rolling stock, such as what you see here, to be converted for its new role. Coaching stock would be formed of Mark IIIs, but sometimes Mark IIs were used, particularly in the Glasgow, Aberdeen and Edinburgh, Aberdeen services. Following the tragic accident at Polmont in 1984, in which a push-pull set collided with a cow that had strayed onto the line, DBSO 9706 was written off, but it was replaced by another new build 9714, another Derby conversion. Following a recommendation at a public inquiry, cow catchers were put onto the DBSOs, and you'll see that when we talk about the DBSO in particular for modelling purposes. In 1986, the Scotrail decided to dispense with the full length Mark IIIs and convert them into what were known as composites, and this meant that half of the coach was taken over by first class and the other half was standard class. And the full length first class Mark IIIs, there were 8 of them I believe were converted to this, and they just had 900 added to their numbers. This allowed a Mark III to be taken out of each Mark III set, and this actually led to the withdrawal of some Mark IIs and the creation of another full Mark III set. In 1989, as the first class 158s were on the production line, 47714 Grampian region was denamed and was transferred from Scotrail to Network South East, operating out of Old Oak Common Depot, where it had actually previously been allocated before being converted to a push-pull. Not long after, 47705 was denamed as Lothian, and it moved south to NSE. As the 158 started to come on stream, the Class 47/7s were removed, and these were transferred to either Network South East or Parcels. The Mark III coaching stock went to Intercity on the West Coast Main Line, and the Mark II DBSOs, they went to Intercity as well, but for the Anglia service from London Liverpool Street to Norwich. So how do you model Scotrail Expresses? Well, before I talk about these sets, I think for completeness sake it's just worth me mentioning about the Class 27 formations briefly. Obviously these would have run in blue and grey coaching stock and they would have also had a 27/2 at each end, and the BSO, the brake standard open, would have actually been at the Glasgow end of the train. So let's talk about first of all the locomotives for the Scotrail Expresses that we see modelled here. If you're going to do a proper push-pull train, of course, it has to have a 47/7. 16 of these were converted. The initial 12 in 1979-1980. 47701 to 10 carried standard blue, that is the small blue, the small BR logo and small numbers on the body side, and blue cab sides. 47711 and 47712 carried what was known as large logo blue or revised blue, or sometimes also known as the more yellow colours, and that's the livery you see there in 47535. Eventually all the machines gained the Scotrail blue stripe livery. They were noticeable as well for the jumper cables that you see on the cab ends. Now this is not the best place to do it, but when I move the rolling stock later on you'll get a better view of it. Sometimes the Glasgow to Aberdeen or Edinburgh to Aberdeen services would not have a push-pull loco on it. This is maybe because of failure of a loco at the previous terminus, or perhaps there wasn't one available for maintenance purposes. And so it was quite common therefore to see a 47/4 hauling the set both ways. Now, this would mean that a 47/4 would actually also be coupled on one journey. It would be coupled next to the DBSO, and the DBSO itself would just be a standard BSO in this case, the driving equipment not being used. Of course the sets looked no problem and the locomotive was at the opposite end of the train. Sometimes the locomotive would break down en route and it would have to get rescued by another one. A classic example of this was when 47715 was propelling an Aberdeen to Glasgow service and failed near Stirling. A Class 37 37410 Aluminium 100 came to the rescue after an hour's delay, and it was coupled next to the DBSO. But the vast majority of the time you would see the locomotive would be a push-pull equipped locomotive. We'll discuss the coaching stock in a minute, but let's talk about the DBSOs. An initial 13 driving brake standard opens, as already mentioned, were made by converting these Mark IIs at Derby in 1979. Again, some of these were surplus after the introduction of HSTs onto the East Coast main line. The driving brake standard opens consisted of 2 cab windows being cut here and on the other side. Just move the camera so you can get a better view of it. The corridor connection was plated over, although initially I'm led to believe that this plate wasn't installed and it was just a closed off corridor connection. That led to drafts and dust coming in, and so the plate was installed as a later application. This is the Bachmann Mark II DBSO, and it is a proper production line DBSO. It has been possible in the past to get Airfix kits to convert a Mark II BSO into a DBSO. Whether these still get manufactured or not, I am not sure. But I know that Bachmann and its sister company for Engage, Graham Farish, have brought these Mark II DBSOs out as a production line. When you're modelling the Scotrail Express push-pulls, the DBSOs were, of course, like the coaching stock, originally in blue and grey, and we'll talk about the livery in just a moment. But I want to draw your attention to something that's maybe not quite so visible on the camera, but that's down here. Is that I've got the cow catcher installed there, where in the NEM pocket. As already mentioned, that was a recommendation after the 1984 Pullman accident, and it allowed, because the cow carcass seemingly got underneath the bogie of the DBSO, which was leading at the time, causing the train to derail, and the cow catcher, or obstacle deflector if you so wish, would push that end item away. Aesthetically as well, it makes the DBSO look more pleasing, more complete with the cow catcher on. RCA's jumper cables were installed on either end here as well, identical to what those were on the locomotive, and we'll talk about them more briefly in a few moments. Headlights were also installed, and they are actually functioning on this DBSO. Currently the Bachmann and Graham Farish DBSOs are the only ones that have been manufactured by a mainstream maker this decade, and the Bachmann DBSO comes with the DCC decoder already fitted. So obvious, because it's going to be heading up or at the rear of a train. That's it heading, and as you can see, if I turn it that other way, that's it trailing with the tail lights on. The cow catcher, if you install it, prevents you from putting a coupling on that end, on the cab end, and that's not a good thing if you're actually wanting to replicate, say, having your push-pull set being hauled by a locomotive due to there being no push-pull locomotive, or simulating a failure. Driving brake standard opens also, the actual bogies themselves were unchanged, and there was no actual real change of length to the vehicle. I'm going to just come round here with the camera and just explain to you about the liveries now. And this is the livery that was starting to get applied to them after 1984, the Scotrail Blue Stripe livery. So they'll either carry in Scotland that livery, or they would carry blue and grey livery with Intercity at one end and the BR logo at the other. However, on the other side of this DBSO, you can't actually see it, unfortunately, because of where I've got the train parked. The BR logo would be here, and just a short distance along it would have Scotrail and then the vehicle number, or if it was blue and grey, it would have Intercity and the vehicle number. By the mid-1980s, all the DBSOs were carrying the blue striped Scotrail livery. I'll just bring the train in a little bit more, because I want to talk next about the coaching stock in between the DBSO and the locomotive. And we'll just stop it there. Initially, most of the push-pull sets had Mark III stock. However, in some cases, the stock itself was air-conditioned Mark II stock. These all carried blue and grey livery at first, with the words Intercity on. I believe some of them had it changed to Intercity Scotrail or just Scotrail whilst in blue and grey livery. But as they were repainted, they would have carried Scotrail livery. So depending upon the time that you're going to be modelling, you might have a mixed livery set with some coaching stock in blue and grey and some coaching stock in blue striped Scotrail livery. It was not uncommon to actually see that sort of thing happening. Some cases the locomotive would still be in blue and grey and the coaching stock in its new livery. In some cases the locomotive in DBSO had the blue stripe livery, but the rest of the set was blue and grey. The Edinburgh-Glasgow sets were almost always formed of the Mark IIIs. Mark IIIs were occasionally also used on the services to Aberdeen from Glasgow and Edinburgh. On the latter two services to Aberdeen, these would normally have been Mark II coaching stock, again in the same blue and grey livery or Scotrail blue stripe livery, but with a little twist in that sometimes the vehicles included a micro buffet, a Mark II micro buffet. This would have carried the normal Scotrail livery, but one of the windows it would have had buffet on it, and there would have been the red stripe over, I think, the first window or the first two windows. It was a very small buffet. They weren't actually used on the Edinburgh-Glasgow sets as buffets, although once or twice the micro buffets were in such formations, but the buffets themselves were not in use. Occasionally, a spare coach might be allocated into a set for movement to a depot. There's footage actually of in Perth in 1989 of one train propelled by 47702, and I'll put the link to it up there if I find it, and there was actually a Mark III sleeper included in the formation. With the 158 Express sprinters being delayed, this actually led to both a stay of execution for the push-pull sets initially, but what it also did do was that Intercity needed a Mark III stock, and some of the Mark IIs on the west coast were going to go to the Anglia route after they'd been refurbished, but they were then had to go on loan to Scotrail to allow it to maintain services until the 158s came along. So it wasn't uncommon to see a push-pull set with maybe a Scotrail liveried coach, 2 or 3 Intercity coaches and another Scotrail coach. I would advise you to check photographs, however, on the internet just to see what formations were available. We'll return to the locomotives, and this is actually a good example, this one, 47708 Waverley, because I travelled behind this between Glasgow and Edinburgh one time in 1989. As they were coming towards the end of their time on Scotrail, 47702 lost its Scotrail branding and just had the BR logos while still in Scotland. 47708 actually had the BR logo and Scotrail branding painted out on both sides and ran in Scotland like that. I know, because as I say, that was a locomotive pulling my train on one occasion from Glasgow to Edinburgh. Other locos lost the Scotrail branding when they were transferred south, such as 47701 and 47711. Although the 47/7's got Network South East livery, like 47701 here, it must be pointed out that they never actually worked on the push-pull trains in NSE livery. But as it's as it's your own layout, what's to stop you from doing that? As the 158s came on stream, there was a bit of a strange state of execution for a couple of the 47/7s, namely 47710 and 47717, which suddenly found themselves working to Inverness, hauling sleeper trains or normal daytime trains until the latter also went over to 158 operation. Now, if you're going to model the Scotrail Express as well, you'll notice a different shade in the colour of the grey below the blue stripe. Of course, these are the Oxford Mark IIIs. These are the Bachmann Mark II DBSOs and the Bachmann 47/7. Well, interesting point that, and David Watson's covered that in a video when he got his, and I would recommend you go and check that out. He actually had to go and re-spray his to solve the problem. I have not got the capability or the facilities to do so. I'm just going to like it and lump it, I'm afraid. Now, there's just one last thing we'll do. We'll actually get the loco in a little bit more, and we'll talk about the cab end once again. Okay, so here we have the cab end of a 47/7, and we've got it in push mode here, as it were. One thing you can't do, by the way, with the locomotives when you put a decoder in them is that, certainly with these ones, you can't turn off the headlights when it's coupled next to the coaching stock. Just want to make that very clear to you right now. So you will have a situation like I see here. I've got the headlights shining onto the first coach on the train, but the red marker lights are there. If it was going the other way, there you go. That's the effect you would get. You'll see on here the jumper cables. People call this a time division multiplex system, but it's not. It's actually an earlier form called the Railway Clearinghouse jumper system, and it uses different technology. That was why the DBSOs had to go to likes of Derby or Devonport in Plymouth to get fitted with time division multiplex equipment to be compatible with the TDM equipment on the Class 86 locomotives on the Anglia region. So the equipment was incompatible, and that's why 47712, which is preserved in Scotrail livery, currently cannot operate with the DBSO that's preserved until a TDM module can be installed somewhere in the locomotive, and it would then make it compatible. So these cables here are identical to the push-pull cables on the, say, a Class 86. They're coach lighting jumpers, but they are for the RCH jumper system. Totally different system to TDM. When you get your machine, the vast majority of the time, unless it's 47706, the cables will be painted in orange. It's just a complete moulding this with the jumper cable, the covers at the top and the plugs at the bottom. I'm pretty sure if you had a very steady hand you might just get away with painting them black, but I've left them orange anyway. But you might get away with painting them black. They were never removed when the locomotives were transferred to parcels on Network South East, by the way. If you are going to go for a 47/7 from, say, Lima, be aware that the earlier versions actually did not have the TDM jumpers, the RCH jumper system cables on them at all. You'll need to try and find somebody that sells them so you can retrofit them. Hornby's new 47712 due later on in 2022 will have them on, and they've told me that they will be orange, so you'll need your steady hand once again. Apart from the jumper cables, everything else is the same as the standard 47. That's the only real difference between them. On the other side of this machine, and you can't see it on here, but we'll use 47701 as an example. I'll just take the camera and bring you over to here. you'll maybe just see down here the white piping. That was actually part of the system that was used with the locomotives, the push-pull locomotives, and it was always picked out in white. Even when they were transferred to parcels or NSC, it was always picked out in white. And the locomotives also, of course, had long-range fuel tanks fitted as well. Now, as David Watson says, they were completely thrashed by the time they left Scotland, and it's a miracle they carried on working for as long as they did. But if I could just make the point, they were designed to be worked as hard as they were, so it's horses for courses, I suppose. I'm just going to finish off by mentioning to you that I've got this permanently coupled using the Bachmann pipe couplers. Now, if I zoom the camera in, you'll be able to see what I'm meaning. You just see that there. That's a pipe coupler there, rather than a proper NEM coupler. And they just go into the pockets in either the locomotive or the coach. If you're going to keep the sets permanently done like that, you're probably just as well to use a pipe coupler, like what I've done here. If you're going to maybe chop and change them every now and then, you just use the normal Bachmann or Oxford rail couplers instead. And by the way, fitting them and replacing the old couplers is just a very simple job of carefully turning the locomotive or coach over, and then using a screwdriver or tweezers to squeeze in the bottom end of the coupler, and then just push it out, slot your new one in. Take your time, it takes about 1.5 minutes per coach. So that's how you model the Scotrail Express, a train that was the iconic Scottish train of the 1980s, and a train that really should still be around with modern Mark V coaching stock and perhaps a class 68 or 88 at the locomotive end. Scotrail, a wee message to you. Transpennine Express have got push-pull sets. Come on, please, can't you give them in? Because I think that a train like this is much more suited to express work, particularly between Glasgow and Edinburgh, than some multiple units. Anyway, I digress. But anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this little video. And as I say, the locomotives and coaching stock can be bought from various retailers or manufacturers. And if you want some ideas on how to model these sorts of trains, David Watson at Dean Park Station has some push-pull sets. So if you could please check out him. Well, that completes this video from Clydebridge Station, so all that remains for me to do is to say thank you very much indeed for watching. Please take care of yourselves and enjoy your layouts, and we'll see you soon. Goodbye for now.